Another thing, I was talking with my teacher today, who popped in for a cup of tea, and he was asking me what questions I get from people, and I told him the most common question I got. Oh, careful, peaches. Little tiny bug. I said the most common question I got was people that had awakened, and this actually goes on to another question that I have here. So this is from a lady called Bleeker, who wrote to me on Facebook, and basically she told me this beautiful story about when she was 19 and she had a massive awakening, and then slowly over time the ego or the sense of I came back. There was an identification with the story, with claiming it. And basically at the end she said, how do I get back to it? And she went into a lot of suffering trying to search back for the stillness and the space. Now my reply to that would be, did you ever do anything to get into that stillness and space in the first place? The self can never get into it because it's the self, the seeking energy, that veils the stillness and the space and who you are, the end of suffering. So how could the separate self ever get back into that space? So I was telling my teacher that this is the main question I got, and his comment, first of all, I said that one of my replies is that when you're imagining stillness and space, you're imagining it in suffering. It's an imagination and a memory that comes when you're suffering. It's not actually it. And what you're doing in imagining it in suffering is you're creating this idea of stillness and space, and then putting it in front of you like another carrot. And it's not you doing it, this is just the dynamic that's happening. This is just the dynamic of the separate self. So it's put this idea of stillness and space in front of the character, and now the character's trying to get to that. But it's an imagination, it's an idea that's coming from suffering. You're only imagining being in stillness and space when you're suffering. You're only wanting to get back there when you suffer. And how can you ever imagine stillness and space when you're suffering? It's the opposite to what's happening. There's the contraction and the feeling like a somebody. There's the doership there. And the stillness and the space or the peace or the nothingness is the absence of that dynamic. It's what's always there, but just the separate self fails it like this. And the separate self, the seeking energy, is what's seen. So it's a trick, it's an absolute trick. A trick for nobody, because there's nobody that can get out of it or do anything. It's just the dynamic, the game of the separate self. So what my teacher said was, they've set it up as another pleasure. So you've set this idea of what you want, the stillness, the space, the end of suffering, the experience as another pleasure. The experience, because you're no experience, you're no thing. So you've got this idea of an experience in which you've set up as another pleasure. Another pleasure exactly the same as the businessman chasing money. There's an idea of what the separate self needs to get to be happy. And the craziness is you are that happiness. It's that dynamic, that seeking dynamic, seeking after pleasure and avoiding pain, that covers the happiness. And Brika, when you had this awakening, you weren't doing anything. It just happened spontaneously. And then the self comes back in and claims it and says, ah, yes, I need to do this to keep it, I need to do that to keep it, which is a trick of the mind, but a trick on no one. And I'm not suggesting do anything or don't do anything, because that's another seeking. I'm not even suggesting stop seeking, you can't. Who is the self? The self is the seeker. When the self falls away, you're nothing. You're just beingness, life, watching, holding to nothing, but nobody holding to nothing. It can be seen through, but by and for nobody. These dynamics can be seen through. And this is the majority of my questions. It's how do I get back to stillness and space? Even in calling it stillness and space, you're setting up an idea, an experience that you think it is. Happiness is the end of suffering. It's not becoming something, it's the end of the seeker. It's becoming no thing and everything, or beingness. It's becoming life without the filter of self. It's not a certain experience of bliss, or like even saying stillness and space, and I call it this, but even saying that is still setting up a dynamic of an expectation of what it is or should be, which is in the mind. It is this. Can't be spoken of, really. Obviously we call it labels to try and talk about it. And another thing that I want to keep coming back to is it is impossible not to talk in self and other. So often when I talk, I'm talking about the dynamics of I suppose somebody there, like I was just talking and I was saying, and then what happens is there's an expectation of what the self is. And it sounds like I'm saying there is somebody there that's created that expectation. And I want to keep coming back to there's nobody there. And in liberation, or happiness, or whatever, you don't live when there's nobody there. You live in no thing, no conceptual understanding of this. It's just this. But the concept of nobody there picks away all that seeking mentality, all the addiction to future and past, this addiction to the story. There's just this, just experience, hogged into nothing, no idea of who I am, what I am. It's just this. Okay.